Thank you very much, Jnanavaca, for coming to talk to me about this, about Suvana Cohousing.
Yeah. No, well, it's a pleasure, Tejasvini. When you wrote to me, I didn't really know anything about co-housing. And since then, I found out a little bit. And I am curious and excited, actually, about what you're trying to set up. So I'm looking forward to learning more about it. So thanks for asking me. Yeah.
Well, lots of people are interested in living closer to other Buddhists and intensifying their practice in some ways. And so residential communities work really well for us. But there's very few opportunities for them. And they're for particular types of people, you know, for single people. They're not for people with families. They're not always for older people. They're not not very widespread. So it seems to me that co-housing, where you can live in an intentional community, have your own front door, and yet be close to other people, is an ideal way of living with people, where you can share your values and cooperate on all sorts of projects. Can you just define intentional community? Because I've heard that. I think I know what it means. I don't know if it's got a particular meaning in this context. I think it's just that you have the intention to live together, to live as a community, rather than just ending up in the same village together. And that's less of an intentional
it's less conscious
community. But co-housing is often people who live in co-housing projects do care about community. They care about environmental matters. They care about sustainability. For example, I live in a co-housing community that's not a Buddhist one, though there are one or two Buddhists who live there. And there's a number of vegans who live there. Many, I would say almost everybody there is concerned about environmental matters. And we try and do things on a cooperative basis. And we're a bit of a focus for the neighbourhood as well. We get involved in neighbourhood projects. Somebody came to us not a year or so ago with some baby hedgehogs in the autumn that had been born that wouldn't have made it through the winter. Can you help? So, you know, we looked after the hedgehogs there. So intentional communities are people who definitely want to share lives in a particular way, which isn't for everybody, you know, not everybody.
Yeah, no, indeed. But it does seem to me that in Sri Ratna, in our community, we've got already a real spirit of that sort of shared way of living. And I could imagine that being translated into a co-housing situation very naturally somehow.
I think that's absolutely right. And sharing values is the best way of creating a community. There's so much ground that's been covered by sharing those values.
So it's interesting. How long have you been in a co-housing community?
So I've been there nearly 2 years.
Okay. And can you describe it? Like you have your own flat, do you?
Yes.
And then how does it work? I mean, actually physically, like what do you do in terms of shared spaces and so on?
Yeah. So we have a number of houses. There's probably more houses than flats, and some flats. And the houses are in terraces, and the flats are in a block of flats. And we have a common house as well. So in the common house, there's a hall and a dining room, hall come dining room, and a kitchen. There are guest rooms, there are meeting rooms, there's a library, we've got a workshop. All these are common facilities. We've got allotments we've got lovely gardens. So people have much smaller private gardens and then big shared space. So in fact, the density is similar to other areas around it, but it's just much more spacious for the area you can share. So we grow vegetables, there are chickens, there's a little Whole Foods shop, we've got a car club, we've got lots of shared things that we do. So we eat together a couple of times a week, and we run our project. So we don't have a management company. We are the management company.
And so Suvana Co-housing, which is the project that you're initiating or involved in initiating, what sort of vision would that have? I could imagine something, but tell me more about what that vision is.
So we'd very much like to live together with owner-occupiers and some renters as well.
Right.
And what's particularly sparked this project is wanting to provide housing for Triratna retirees.
Okay.
So we're very aware that there isn't always housing available for people who've given their lives to working in our centres, Buddhist centres or retreat centres, and to have a Buddhist community that they could move into once they retire would be just a really good thing to be able to offer to people.
Yeah.
But I've also become aware more recently of how younger people also need housing, and it's very difficult for them.
Yeah.
And I think a multi-generational housing scheme would be, the best, really, the most natural.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a village on a small scale, where you have people of all ages, and you can support each other. You can also reach out into the local community and put our Buddhist principles into practice at home and further afield.
Yes, and presumably you could have a common shrine room and practice together in that way as well.
Yes, that's part of the vision, and possibly having workspaces that people can share, guest rooms. Yes,
And do you have a sort of idea as to where you'd ideally like this project to be situated?
So we'd like it to be within, we've said within 30 minutes bike ride of the Buddhist Centre.
In Cambridge?
In Cambridge.
Right, yeah.
Yes, we are a Cambridge-based group.
Yeah.
But people might well move from further afield. We hope to attract people.
Yeah.
So within easy access of the Buddhist Centre, there's a new development that's going to be happening over the next 5 to 20 years in Cambridge Northeast that's called Hartree. So there's lots of possibilities there. We might be able to get in on an early part of the development as a co-housing scheme, and that is going to be a neighbourhood that's more like an urban quarter, so quite high density housing, but with green spaces, with fantastic public transport, mostly pedestrianised, so there would be mobility hubs to the edge of it. So it would be a pleasant place to live and move around, and then easy, just quarter of an hour into Cambridge city centre.
That sounds like a great place. So can you say where you are with the project, what needs to happen next, and how far you've come? And
yeah, good.
Yeah.
So we've got a company formed. We've got a lot of our policies, allocation policy, and land brief for what we'd like to build to hand to developers. And we are in discussion with. We've been in discussion with a couple of developers, one of whom is very promising and builds a lot of co-housing projects. And so they're definitely bearing us in mind for the development in this area of Cambridge called Hartree. Though we're not completely fixed on being in Cambridge, we might be open to projects elsewhere. In fact, I'd love this. I'd love Suvana co-housing to evolve into a model that other centres, other cities could pick up, so that they have co-housing projects where they can also offer subsidised housing to people in need of it. And there are other co-housing groups forming around Foxton, I think, and around Adistana. That it's something that has a growing interest.
Yeah. It's interesting at the LBC, I mean, we haven't got a co-housing initiative, and yet naturally we've got people living around there. The centre's acted as a sort of magnet for a community to form, and this seems like taking that further and into another level of shared lives. But I know what it's like to live as part of a sort of village. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
To have that sort of shared vision, shared ideal for what life is about. And in London, that's it feels like a very rare thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very precious. And people you bump into all the time on the street.
Yeah.
And living at Marmalade Lane, where I live, in the co-housing project I live in, is a bit like that. You just bump into people and you talk about projects like planting a new flower bed or something that you're going to do, and you have chats about it. And how much more meaningful when you're talking, meeting about Buddhist projects.
Yes, indeed. I think it really could add another strand to Bante's vision of the new society and how we address the fact that many people do want to live with other Dharma practitioners, other Buddhists, but not necessarily in a community situation, or maybe that, as you say, isn't an option for people. I think it could add another whole strand, which seems very natural and somehow very exciting.
And also very enriching for the wider community that you're part of. It adds resilience to a community. It adds stability. And of course, it gives doorways into people finding the Dharma.
Yeah. So you imagine this community, you've already said ideally it would be intergenerational. So you'd have younger people, older people, families, single people, people with their partners, a whole range of lifestyles, sharing this space together.
Living in close proximity and having shared spaces, perhaps having smaller houses than they would, or living spaces than they would normally have, because you've got the shared facilities. So it's really, really helpful for resource use and reducing your footprint. And then sharing activities together, sharing meals, meditating together. Perhaps doing outreach groups. And you don't actually have to be a Buddhist. So we're a community of people who share and are inspired by Buddhist values. But we're not prescriptive about your beliefs. So we really welcome anybody who's interested.
And then you can see, I guess, if I wasn't a Buddhist but was interested, I'd learn more about what your values are and see if it would work for me. And you'd presumably get into dialogue and relationship with people who are interested.
Well, many people share the ethical basis. They relate to the ethical basis of the precepts because they're universal values.
Yeah, they are.
And so we welcome anybody who shares those values, and what we build will be a good community. And some of us will be Buddhists and be able to take draw more inspiration from that and more practice from that. But we want to welcome everybody. People have different doorways.
Sure, it's not exclusive to Buddhists. So I'm interested. So what you're saying is that, look, people don't have to be a Buddhist. They don't have to identify as a Buddhist, at least. But your intention is that the community is based on Buddhist values. So what would that look like in practice for somebody?
Living in a community where you're surrounded by people who are acting on the basis of friendship and openness would really transform your life. It would be a very different experience to what many people have. So that's the sort of thing that we're trying to create.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. That sounds very exciting, actually. And, just for me to get an idea, if people are living in a space like this, in a place like this, in a community like this, there's no compulsion to share meals and activities. I mean, can they choose? What's the relationship between involvement in the community and living one's own life in one's own house or flat?
Well, I think there's probably always going to be a complete range of involvement. So there will be people who are either want or are not able to be as involved as others, and others who really want to throw themselves in very fully to the community. So there is no compulsion, but I think people who would join the community would probably want to live with a degree of involvement.
It goes back to the intentional community again, doesn't it? That you're looking for people who are inspired by this this way of living, this community way of living. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me, and I think that is, at least I can see the attraction for many, many people.
And it's such a valuable and rare thing on offer these days. You know, I think there are many people, well, just involved in Triratna around this country who are not close to centres, who are not living close to Sangha, who really feel the spiritual need to be closer to people. And this is one way that they can do that.
Yeah, no, I can really see that. I think that, I mean, the pandemic has allowed and encouraged, in a way, connection online. And that's been a great thing for many, many people. But I know for myself, it's not the same as actually living nearby or with other people who share those values that you do. It's a very different thing.
And actually, the pandemic and online classes have even brought in more people from further afield, who then might feel that more acutely.
It seems to be something very timely, and I'm really glad that, I don't know, there's this model, and that you've got some developers who are interested. I mean, you mentioned when we were talking earlier that in other countries this model is more established than it is in this country. Could you say anything about that?
Yes, sure. So I know in Germany and Holland and some other European countries, it's more of a priority for governments and for local governments. Austria is another one where they have much more community housing, and it's very easy. You just form a group and go to the council, and it's much easier to form something. But the situation in this country is it's very developer-led. So we really need to get the support of developers, and it's much more of an uphill struggle. We have to compete on lots of different levels with people who are involved with it professionally.
So I can see that, you know, you're having to in a way not exactly start from scratch, but there's a lot to form yet. Do you have ideally a timescale in mind for when you might be able to actually start this community?
Well, we're trying to put everything in place so that if a site comes up or an opportunity comes up, we're ready to move. And in order to do that, we need more members. We need a more substantial base of people who are willing to join us. So that's what we're aiming at the moment, in encouraging more people to join us so that we can make this a reality. And I would hope that within 4 or 5 years, we'll have a project that will be ready to go. But obviously it depends on our developers, it depends on planning permission and lots of things outside our control.
Yes. No, that's helpful to hear. So is there anything else you want to say to people watching about this project? Why should they get interested? What would they get from it? And
well, they'd have the opportunity to live alongside people with shared values. They'd have the opportunity to contribute to a project or develop a prototype or take the prototype and put it into practice in their own area. I think that would be, you know, a great thing to see more of these sorts of projects happening. So we're working with the Abhayaratna Trust to look at doing some market research to find out what order members' needs are in terms of housing. And then we might be able to use that evidence both for our developers and to respond to the housing needs of order members and others.
That sounds very good.
So can I ask you something, Jnanavaca?
Of course,
So you've lived in community for
27 years, I think.
It obviously has something to offer. Tell us a bit about your experience of community living. And also around the LBC.
Well, I just think it's such a human way to live with other people and be in a community of other people who, well, in the words, have an intentional community who share some values. I feel very privileged, actually, to be able to live like that. I think particularly we live in such a culture of atomization and individualism. And in London, that's really the case. So to be living in London, in East London, where I can walk out of, I don't know, the door and go down the road and almost be guaranteed to bump into somebody that I know, somebody who shares my values, at least to some degree. I'm used to actually being stopped by people that I don't know who have come to the Buddhist Centre and know me. That's very, very unusual in London, I think, and it feels a very human and natural way to live. I think that's just ideal. And for me, community living works. So I have my own room, but there's 10 of us in the household, in the flat above the London Buddhist Centre, and that works for me. But I can also understand, certainly around the London Buddhist Centre, that not everybody wants to live like that. And around the London Buddhist Centre, what you've got is other people who are living in their own homes or renting, living in shared housing, or families who have gravitated to be around the London Buddhist Centre because there is a community feel. Estate agents in Bethnal Green have even talked of the Buddhist village. So I think there is an understanding that we've had an impact on the local community, the local area, just by being there and sharing some values. I think it's a tremendous way to live. It feels a natural way to live. I'm sort of sure that many, many more people want to live in that way. And it's a shame that, you know, we are living in a culture which is becoming more and more individualistic. And I think people are lonely. A lot of people are lonely, not having that sort of sense of belonging. So I feel very grateful that I have got that opportunity. I'd love for more people to have that opportunity. That's why I feel sort of excited by what you're suggesting. Yeah.
Yes, I think round Newmarket Road in Cambridge, in this area, there was definitely a village feel, which I think is, I'm sure is still there to an extent, but perhaps not to the extent it was in, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Right, yeah.
And it would be lovely to recreate that in other parts of the city.
It would, wouldn't it? It would. You know, speaking personally, like Bethnal Green in East London, which is where I live, is not an attractive place. I wouldn't choose to have lived there, you know, in any other circumstances. But what I really value is community. And I'm willing to sacrifice other things in order to have community. Not that Bethnal Green's a bad place. I mean, actually now it's a desirable location for many people. But yeah, for me, what's most important is that sense of community and being part of something bigger. So, Tejasvini, you mentioned that, you know, living in this way with shared resources would reduce people's footprints, carbon footprints. It sounds a more sustainable way of living. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we want to design buildings intelligently to reduce water and energy use. We want to have more open spaces on the streets so that children can play, so we have better air quality with cars relegated to the edges of the site, except obviously where disabled access and delivery is needed.
You're really consciously putting sustainability and environmental concerns at the heart of the vision.
Very much so.
Yeah. And then also once you're living there, I mean, you're sharing resources presumably, so that really is a much more sustainable way of living.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if people watching this are inspired by the idea of living in an intentional community based on shared values, what should they do next? What should they do?
Become a co-creator. Okay. £20 per household per year.
Right.
And the address is on the screen.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, it sounds a wonderful project. I really, really wish you well with it, Tejasvini. I think it's a great idea. And visionary kind of idea. And I think it would be tremendous to have this as part of our community and an option for as many people as would like to live in this way. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me.
It's a pleasure.